Welcome to another episode of Comp and Coffee. This time around, we thought it might be fun. Ruth's with us today. Matt's with us. Of course, Bill, our compensation ombudsman, is that the word we're looking for, is also here with us today. And I did want to, thought this would be an interesting topic. Actually, this just came up also I had the privilege of moderating a panel at the Chicago Compensation Association. And this actually came up too about how the times seem to be changing here on us rapidly, because it hasn't even been 6 months since the last crisis, and we have a new crisis. And so we thought it might be interesting to kind of talk about how we should think about our compensation strategies and maybe adjust them as we look at market changes and sort of this turbulent time we live in. And what should we be doing differently? You know, when you think about this idea that we've been talking the last 9 months that the talent market has been employee-led, and it's really their game to set. And we need to be thinking aggressively on pay to make sure that we retain and attract top talent, as always, of course. But as we look ahead now, it seems like all signs are pointing to a recession may be looming, or maybe we're even in the leading edge of one. Inflation's at a 40-year high. It seems like our financial markets are feeling a little soft right now. And also, in addition to those headwinds, and organizations' cost of just doing business is going up, right? Your cost of labor has been going up, obviously, but supply chain challenges, you got cost of just doing business with fuel costs, electrical costs, energy costs, everything else. But now, in addition, it looks like other companies are starting to sort of think more aggressively about this. And we're starting to see those first few stories about layoffs. Right. And usually the tech sector is one of those aggressive sectors that kind of the bellwether, maybe the canary in the coal mine. They seem to get antsy first. Just saw an article in Crunchbase, just came out July 5th, I think, like two days ago or so. Article there about 24,000 workers or so in the tech sector being laid off. Newsweek just ran a story on the 21st of June. 95 companies are doing layoffs. We just heard Elon Musk made some big waves with Tesla having some layoffs. So here we go. Another recession potentially. Let's start with Bill. Bill, have we seen this before? Have we seen this movie? What do we do in these sort of situations? How is it feeling right now?
We have definitely seen this movie before. I'm a little embarrassed that you picked me first, because I'm going to totally block Ruth and Matt from answering the question. I remember like back in 73, the oil crisis, and lining up for gas on even and odd days because, the OPEC producers had stopped producing or limited their production, and that sent the whole world into a economic tailspin in the early 70s. But then, in the early 80s, there was the energy crisis and, all the issues with Iran at the time. Early 90s, I don't remember what was going on in the early 90s. I should, but I don't. Yeah, exactly. And then starting in the 21st century, you've got, September 11th, and you've got the financial collapse of Enron and Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, WorldCom, sort of this whole early 2000s economic collapse, and then the Great Recession of the subprime loan problem in 2008, 2010. So it happens over and over again, but they're all similar but not the same. And it depends on the cause, it depends on the effect and the intensity and who gets hit first, and so on. But yes, we've been this way before, even though it's going to seem like a surprise to everyone.
I think that's why you're the ombudsman, Bill. You just shared your personal experiences all the way back to the Carter administration. So well played, sir.
Tell us your age, Bill. I was going to say, tell us your age without actually telling us your age.
Right.
I just did that.
Yeah, I was just counting which of those I don't remember. So there were a few I don't remember, Bill. I remember the 1990s one because I ran off to Asia to avoid it.
Well, to be clear, I wasn't driving in 1973. I wasn't legally driving in 1973.
But yeah, we have definitely seen them before. And, I think you alluded to it, Bill, each one is unique in its own way. And what I always find interesting is, what comes in the tailwind in terms of what we learn. If we think back to the financial recession, what came out of that was all around regulation and control over compensation. And it's interesting to think as we go in now, could we predict what will be in the tailwind of this recession in terms of how we manage compensation? And I think we might talk more about that today.
I think we will. So Matt, as the youngest member of our panel, does this feel all new to you, or are you like, no, I've seen this movie too?
No, as the baby here, it does not feel completely new because I was around for the 2007, 2009 recession. I was working within the same space. Was not podcasting. Was podcasting a thing in 2007? I don't think it was.
It was just the iPod was around, so there was some, but the iPhone didn't really hit till 2008, so it didn't become huge then yet.
So I was in the compensation software space at that time. So I at least feel a little prepared to talk with our customers about it, as we start to see some of these layoffs happening. But, I'm sure it'll present new surprises and those sort of things. But, I think that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this podcast.
That's right. And I think there's a real opportunity here too. And as we start thinking about what do we think is going to happen here, right? Like, how is the response going to be? Some of us can lean on experience. Some of us can just, Matt's worked with tons of clients, so you've seen clients react to these sorts of situations too. But one takeaway I think right from the beginning we should all think about is that if you're a person, if you're in a different generation than some of your comp analysts and other folks on your team who maybe are younger, it might be a good time to help those people understand that this isn't the end of the world, right? These things have happened before. And here's how these things get navigated, right? Because I think there's going to be a small set, sort of initial panic and oh my goodness. But I think there's a lot of, some of this is probably a correction. Some of this is, we'll see what happens here. But sort of, Bill, how do you think people are going to respond? What do you think is going to happen here as people start to realize, yep, this is a recession and it could take a while to get out of?
I think it's funny. People are going to react differently, and it was a good point you made that the more senior folks should make sure the more junior folks understand like how these things play out or can play out, but to be aware, to use Ruth's point, that they can be similar but different. I'm going to step back a second. Things that are different this time around are where on the hopefully tail end of a pandemic, there was a big drop, there was a big spike, there was the Great Resignation. There's inflation caused, by effectively people underestimating the negative or overestimating the negative impact of the pandemic on the economy, which has created a problem with, coupled with supply chain issues, people having more money and challenges spending it, which is now creating or helping to create this problem of the slowdown. And I think what we're going to see is, companies are going to start to look to, cut. And we've seen this, the tech sector in particular has started, and they are, publicly making, having layoffs and reducing workforce and, probably going to reduce bonuses and reduce hiring. We're also going to see companies taking advantage of the opportunity to do a little cleaning up because, what happens when the economy is going well is people tend to be overly optimistic, hire too much, and, frankly, hire poorly. So these things, the opportunistic people, in our field will see this as the chance to get rid of some of those, I guess, aggressive hires. And then we'll also see the self-denial crowd, that are, going to hold out as long as possible and sometimes too long. And then those companies are going to struggle because they've held on too tight for too long. Sorry, Matt, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a bit of a unique situation too, coming off of COVID, because I think we saw people super aggressively hiring and adding a lot of jobs because they hadn't been doing a ton of hiring maybe during COVID. And so that overcorrection will be, it's like very quick from when they hired all those positions as well, right?
Yes, and that's another one of the things that's very different here is how fast, it's sort of like the tail end of the whip. It's like flipped, down, up, down, and that's fairly unusual. And so we're seeing, we're going to see companies reacting, I think, soon. And one thing I would say is that, please don't send us letters. Just like, it doesn't matter if we actually get into a technical recession. It's just a question of whether the economy slows down, whether inflation increases, things like that. That's really the issue at hand. Recession is just a good, single word to kind of signify that kind of economic pressure on us as employers.
Yeah, and I think the main question that I'm getting asked at the moment, is that will we move from an employee-led market, which it has been very much for the last sort of 9 months or so, to an employer-led market? So will the power be back in the hands of the employer? But I think, whilst there may be more supply in the labour market, I think we'll still have skill shortages. That will lead to, spikes in pay in particular sectors. I think we saw job openings down in 7% in May. We're waiting for the June data, but vacancies still outnumber available candidates 2-1. So, I don't think it will be a completely employer-led market.
Yeah, Matt, do you feel like you're going to see?
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Matt, do you think? What do you think there's going to be any reaction from clients directly? Are you hearing anything from folks now, even that are sort of saying things like, "Yeah, we need to start doing these sorts of activities"?
I hear that there are some budget cuts happening. They want to be able to do pay increases for their top employees and to be able to retain their top talent. So I think even in a time like this where hiring is slowing down, we're looking at whether the economy is going to slow down a little bit too. And HR organizations are still looking at compensation to make sure that they're paying appropriately so that they're retaining their top talent, but then also, for saving money as well too, and not overpaying. So they're taking a keen eye look at compensation right now, as they should be.
I think you're right. And that actually, you raise an interesting point that's going to create a bit of an internal challenge between different folks in an organization that focus on different time horizons, right? You still got your HR team and your comp team, and your managers who are just trying to get the job done today, right? And they're still feeling, to Ruth's point, there's not enough, butts in seats. And to Matt's point, well, it seems like the answer to that still is getting compensation right. Maybe we're still facing compression issues from last year. It hasn't been that long, right? Maybe we're still a little under market. Maybe we got to correct. But then you have the folks, guys steering the ship at the top, and they're looking farther and they see the storm on the horizon, or maybe we're starting to in the leading edge of it. And so they're like, hey, we need to start taking action now. We need to start cutting budgets now. And so now you're going to have a conflict between the folks who still feel like we haven't got all the corrections done from last time, and the folks who are like, if we don't take proaction now, we're going to get into trouble. And that kind of leads us into one of the things I definitely wanted to jump into. And maybe Matt, you can start us off on this topic. In your view on are layoffs the right thing to do in a situation like this? Is that something that we should be, especially since it's really hard to give cuts across the board now, especially where everybody is the right thing to be thinking about layoffs?
I think it depends on the company. It may be the right decision for many organizations to do, but not for all. I think organizations need to think, thoughtfully about how they approach this, and whether, not jumping the gun and doing massive layoffs when maybe they should wait a little while and decide whether it's the right thing to do. And if they do decide it's the right thing to do, which they may, is do it in a considered manner. Your brand as an employer will be impacted, and you're going to want to hire again in the future. If you do layoffs now, there will be a time when you're going to need to hire positions back, create new jobs and that sort of stuff. And you want to make sure that you're doing layoffs in the most thoughtful way that you can. Obviously, it's a very difficult thing to do, and it impacts employees in a terrible way. But, you can think back to this is in the last year. I'm trying to think of the company, but there was a CEO who laid off like 1,000 people over a Zoom, and that got on the news. Terrible publicity for that organization. And, I've been at organizations, back to 2007, 2008, that time frame when there were a lot of layoffs going on. And, I've lived through ones that were not done in the best way, security guards being brought in, people being sent to different rooms and stuff like that. People remember that stuff and people talk about that stuff,
Yeah. Good point. Ruth, what's your reaction to the looming threat of layoffs? How should organizations be thinking about this?
I mean, it is the knee-jerk reaction, isn't it? We've got to cut costs by 15%. Let's lay off some people. I think, you've still got to get work done. And I think we always need to remember that. And if you are reducing headcount, remember that you'll have less talent. And so you need to really think about investing the talent that you are keeping, because that, you need high value talent to get more done with less. So whilst, let's not be myopic and continue to think about investing in your talent programs and working with the people you have. And I think internal mobility is something we could potentially think about a bit more. As I said, many organizations still have a number of vacancies and they have some key roles and skills that they need. So maybe we should be thinking more this time rather than sort of laying people off about how can we retrain people or how can we move people internally into the roles where we really need the most effort to happen.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's a great point. What are your thoughts in this area, Bill? Like, what do you think about when you think about these kind of things happening? Are layoffs where people should be turning first? Is it a last resort, a first resort? What are your thoughts?
I think the combination of what Ruth and Matt said is correct. It's you need to consider it, and it's always a major tool. It's somewhat of a blunt instrument. It's in some ways weirdly the easiest way because you save on average $100,000 per person when you do that, but it's not the best thing for the organization. You need to think it through carefully, and I think the key to doing it is preparation and knowledge. Like, as Ruth was saying, know who you need. You should always know these things. You should always know, like, who are the people in your organization that you absolutely need to keep, and make sure they know it. And make sure that you do the things that you need to do to keep those people. And that's a continuous thing. And you should also know who the people are that you kind of don't need to keep, or the ones that you should let go. What I was, referring to earlier on here, the cleaning house, the people that aren't the best fit. And your manager should know that too. They should have a loose idea of, A, B, C, D players in their organization. So when the time comes, it's usually somewhat of a fire drill. Everyone's prepared to make the decisions. But as Matt said, it is a culturally dangerous thing to do. And part of it is you have no choice. You have to do it in certain situations. But the other side of that is you should do it, remembering that these are people. This is not a financial exercise; it's a human exercise, and that you're dramatically impacting people's lives, and often it's people that can't afford to be out of work. And this go around, there won't be, I assume there won't be like extra unemployment enhancement checks coming to people. So they're not going to be making more unemployed than employed. They're going to be making less. And often the people that you're laying off are the low paid people. And so keep that in mind and do it, thoughtfully, carefully, and help those people get out, get out into the working world. As a side note, I've seen a bunch of companies that have had layoffs recently, that the tech companies that you guys were referring to in various lists and articles, where with employee permission, they're publishing lists of employees who are being laid off, what they do, what their title is, and, posting it on social media or emailing it to all of their HR contacts, which is, unnecessary, but a very good thing to do. It's like you're just accelerating each of those people's ability to go find a new job.
You make a good point there, Bill, because this is probably the first recession where, this whole feeling of equity and fairness, or equality and fairness, is now becoming so much more part of our societies and our workplaces. And so how do you go through this process and think about how you treat people equitably and fairly, as well? It's maybe something we haven't had to think about before.
That's a great point. And all of you sort of hinted at some of the challenges. Well, you didn't hint. You were very direct about the challenges around layoffs, right? the cultural impact. Ruth just brought up a great point on the fairness impact. And Bill, I think you said it's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. And so I wonder, if we as compensation professionals, if we're doing a good job managing up to our leadership team, and we have a clear and understood compensation strategy that allows us to be proactive, could we avoid things like knee-jerk reactions that could potentially be very damaging to the company, to the ability to first execute in our reputation as well as company culture? So does this imply there are different things we should be doing as we manage compensation? So if we are strategic and we have a seat at the table and people are listening to what we have to say, what should we be saying now? How should we be thinking differently about compensation? How can we ensure our leadership team actually know we see the clouds on the horizon too? And here's a responsible way we can navigate this storm while keeping our best talent, while, keep managing our budget, and get us out on the other side. Okay. Ruth, what's your reaction to that? How should we be thinking about our compensation management going into something like this?
I think the good news for those of us working in reward and managing compensation is that the whole process of paying people or rewarding people is evergreen. So, bull or bear market, people still get paid. So hopefully we'll still be actively engaged. But you do need to pivot what you're thinking about. And, one of the big things you really need to start thinking about, you should do this all the time, but optimizing compensation spend. So Matt mentioned, people cutting back budgets. You want to make sure that for every dollar you're spending is productive in terms of talent management, in terms of how you're engaging employees, and especially how you're driving performance. And you need to think about the information that you're giving to managers in terms of making discerning compensation decisions. We weren't particularly great at that, after the financial crisis, the last big recession, the 2008-9 recession. What we saw happen in the 10 years after that was really poor pay differentiation. We saw that 3% pay budgets every year, and very much peanut butter approach to pay allocation. And that was, the complete opposite of optimizing compensation spend. That was kind of just pay everybody the same. And I hope we don't, we need to be more intelligent about how we spend compensation, in terms of, linking what our people are doing and driving business performance, and recognizing the people who are contributing most to that business performance.
Yeah, I think Ruth, you just hinted. Well, Bill, I want to throw this over to you. I think Ruth just hinted at data is really important to be able to help our leaders make these decisions and justify some of our instincts in the total reward space. What's your reaction to that? How should we be doing a better job with data?
I think it's true, but you keep doing this to me. You keep setting me up for lots of things to talk about, and then you ask me a different question. So,
it's because you're too good, Bill. I can't give you softballs all the time. I got to throw a curveball at you.
Well, I want to enhance. What Ruth was saying is we should be proactive. Use our seat at the table to start the discussion now. Don't wait. And one of our problems as HR people, comp people, is we wait for somebody to come and tell us we're going to have layoffs, and by then it's too late, because what happens is, somebody says we've got to cut X million dollars from our spend. Each department has to do it pro rata by headcount, and here are your budgets. Now go make it happen. There's a whole lot of decisions in that are wrong. Ruth's peanut butter approach. It's a peanut butter approach to layoffs and cost cutting. And so talk about it and see, what are we trying to do? What are we going to have, like, how long do we think this is going to last? What do we want to get accomplished? Do we want to focus on getting that new product out the door quickly to help boost our top line? Or do we want to put that on hold and hunker down and just make sure we keep our current clients? Or, what is it that we need to do? Which groups should be more impacted or less impacted by layoffs? What kinds of roles are they? Not just, this department gets, everybody gets a 23% cut, execute. So probably a bad word. Never mind. So back to your question about data. I mean, this is going to be just like it was, a year ago? In 2021. It's like everybody's going to be clamoring for more data, better data, more granular, more up to date, faster information, and we need that as practitioners to be able to figure out what the right market is for jobs. And remember, just because you're having layoffs doesn't mean you don't have to worry about employee churn and hiring, because you're still going to be hiring, you're still going to have backfills, and remember, your good employees are the ones most likely to be able to leave on their own and go find a new job. And I think there's a little promotional here, but please remember, if you want data that's real time or fast data, recent data, you have to provide that. It's like, we have tools that can give you real time data, but you need to be providing that data to us so that we can aggregate it and spit it back. And all the data vendors have this issue: is we need data from the customers, from the employers. I think we're also going to see lots of surveys and polls about, what are you doing for salary increases this year? What are you doing for year-end bonuses or annual bonuses? Are they going to go down, or are you going to keep them where they were originally budgeted? I think depending on how severe the economic downturn is, the more severe it is, the more likely we are to see companies sort of reach into that bonus pool and take some money out of that to help offset the cost cutting. And that's, normal fare, et cetera. But again, it's a communication issue and also an allocation issue. Is you can't, again, if your bonus pool gets cut 50%, you don't want to cut everyone's bonus 50%. You want to keep the super high performers well paid, and the sort of average and lower performers will probably take a bigger hit in most cases.
Yeah, Matt, what's your reaction to all that? I mean, you think about sort of Ruth's points and Bill's points and what you're hearing from clients now. How should they be thinking differently about what they're doing right now for compensation?
Well, I'm thinking, how am I supposed to follow up on Bill's answer after he just did that? I mean, anything I say right now is just going to fall short. But
thank you.
No, you weren't. No, I was not. What I think we're going to see is some continued stuff that we've been seeing over the last few years. And we may have even done a podcast episode about skills and skills-based market pricing. Can't remember if we did. If we didn't, probably should. We did. All right, good. I'm not going crazy here. I think we're going to see companies, looking to do more with less, like we saw during COVID, a continued focus on, increasing productivity, which requires new skills. So I think we'll see a continued focus on the skills aspects of jobs and making sure that we're accounting for that in the compensation process, the market pricing process, the hiring process, all of the above.
Yeah. I think one thing you just made me think of, Matt, when you said that, and you referenced COVID, and one of the things we saw back then was, a couple of things happened that I'll never forget. Because Ruth, you sort of mentioned, hey, the nice thing about being in compensation is that, we'll always have a job because people always get paid, and managing compensation is more important than ever. But I'll never forget this conversation. We had a call with a bunch of clients, right. It was like April 2020. And everybody was with industries that were all really getting impacted by the lockdowns. It was hospitality. And they literally we're doing a bunch of furlough and layoffs but we laid off our furlough team. So we have no one to do the actual layoffs, right? And so I think companies got to be really smart about this sort of stuff. And the other thing that happened was a lot of companies got overly aggressive. So they did layoffs, they did furlough, and they're just like, well, you'll come back, right? You'll wait for us, and then you'll come back as soon as we need you, right? And it turned out, no, they did not come back, right? And now you have a lot of the challenges. You still have companies that are vastly understaffed from that. So I hope that a lot of us learned some of the lessons from 2020 where we did have to do, and sometimes it was really hard. We had to do very strong reactions because many companies were being literally told you cannot do business for the foreseeable future, right? So that's a very different situation than we're in now. So it's clearly not that bad right now. So let's not overreact and get ourselves in a situation where we cannot course correcting is we're going to be constantly oversteering in both directions, right? That's sort of, maybe one of the things we can do is kind of help our leadership teams look back to 2020, get some lessons from there, and not make some of those same mistakes. I want to, before we close out, there was one other topic I wanted to touch on. Bill and Ruth, you guys both touched on this idea that, hey, we're in an age of pay equity and pay transparency awareness, right? Maybe we'll do some of these things a little differently. Maybe we'll be a little more thoughtful about how we treat our people, even if they're leaving us. But also sort of where does all this leave us with pay equity and pay transparency? Right now, these are top of mind for many organizations. They're on like the top 3 or 4 things they were thinking about going into this year. Do we feel like those things will still stay top of mind? Or given this, I don't want to call it a distraction, but this giant event that's occurring right now, yet another one, it seems like, do you think companies will put that on the back burner and say, you know what, we don't have time right now for this pay equity, pay transparency thing. We really need to just navigate the coming storm. Let's, Bill, I'm going to do it to you again. I'm going to start off with you. Try not to suck up all the oxygen in the room, Bill. So, but what is your thoughts on this? How do we remind companies that equity and transparency are still important during all this?
I like the way you changed the question. I like that. It is important. I think companies' initial reaction is going to be at least put off the gas pedal to, slow down and stop those, aggressive, proactive planning and new initiative campaigns that they have going on about, bringing everyone into line and making all the adjustments. When the economy tumbles, they're going to be more focused on, sort of more core, business drivers. Not to say that's not a core business driver, but it's not one of the core measurements yet. Part of the problem of being early in the, in the adoption. But you can't stop. You can't stop paying attention because it's not just about being fair and equitable on the way up. It's also being fair and equitable on the way down. And if you're doing layoffs, you don't want to be laying off a hugely disproportionate number of women or minorities. You're going to find yourself like on the front page of the newspaper or, in an article or a blog that you don't want to be in. And you got to be mindful of who's on your A list to keep. And even things like, this is going to be maybe too complicated for a short piece in this podcast, but if what you did was a year ago to help, increase the equity with equity, in other words, giving stock or particularly options or option-like things, upside values to women and minorities as a way of leveling the playing field. If you did that recently, as the market was booming, then those options have high strike prices. And as the stock market goes down, those go underwater and they're worthless. And if you were doing that because you had a bunch of, middle-aged white men who had options from 5 years ago, which were at much lower prices, theirs are, also worth less. They've lost the same value, but they still have value. And things like that may not go unnoticed, whereas, you gave us all a bunch of stuff and now it's worthless. And so you keep that in mind as whether or not you've recreated an equity issue or created a new equity issue, or importantly, the appearance of a pay equity issue. Like, all of those things will still matter. And, people get even angrier when there are layoffs and the economy is bad and inflation is high. People are more sensitive to pay issues. And so you will be hearing from your employees or former employees if you do something that's perceived to be inappropriate, bad, or inequitable.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a question I've had asked a lot of me in the last 2 to 3 weeks. We're working with clients on pay equity and pay equity strategy. Do we stop prioritizing this? And I think the answer is you can't. Unfortunately, expectations of pay equity and transparency are so much part of the employer brand now, and employees have very strong expectations around that. And I think if you started a journey and you've stated commitments, you'll just really damage your employee engagement if you stop focusing on that now. We've become much more human-focused organizations since the last recession, which, when probably at that time we were more focused on the bottom line. Maybe we need to think more about, if budgets are smaller in organizations, for example, think about those employees. Bill talked about it earlier, lower earning employees who, because of the increases in cost of living, have eroded purchasing power. So if pay budgets are limited, maybe we should be seeing higher pay increases for lower earning employees. And we saw some of that during the recession, and we have seen that sort of in the last 4 to 5 years in organizations. But I definitely don't think you can shut the box on pay equity and transparency. It's going to be a strong theme, and your employees, again, focusing on your employer brand will want you to continue to be working on this.
100%.
I think that's right. It'll be seen as an excuse. You're taking advantage of, like, the downturn to not do something. It's not a good look.
Yeah. Matt, I'm going to give you the last word on pay equity and pay transparency. How would you remind our clients this is still important?
I mean, I think Ruth and Bill summed it up really well. The only other thing I was going to say is I think that you may see some companies drop off a little bit and have less of a focus on the pay equity side of things, or even pay transparency. And I think those are probably the companies that were the last to join. I think, like, the organizations that, really believe in the social side of it and getting things right and fixing issues that are out there, they're going to stick with it. And they'll see the importance, like what Bill was talking about, when you are laying people off and making sure that you're doing so appropriately. But I think, there's some organizations that joined this whole movement because they maybe felt pressure from their employees. They felt like they had to join in, and they weren't as, focused on getting it right in the social side of things. So you could see some of those organizations, I think, sort of drop off on their focus and tend to focus more on just sort of managing the layoff side of things and the budget and that sort of stuff.
Great point. Great place for us to close there, Matt. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Ruth, Bill, and Matt, for all those great insights. That's what we think about when we think about how to try to manage compensation during a turbulent time. But what do you think? Please let us know. Either email us coffee@payscale.com or just send a tweet to us over at Payscale on Twitter. Thanks for listening to Comp and Coffee. Comp and Coffee is a Pay Factors production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payfactors.com, tweet us at PayFactors, or share your thoughts in our Pay Factors community tile. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.